Here's what's coming up on the world today. Families separated as Egypt restricts entry for Sudanese nationals fleeing conflict. U.S. President Joe Biden hails partnership and friendship with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And one Thai student dead, 5 injured after fire extinguisher explodes during a drill. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in Sudan. The head of America's Agency for International Development says USAID is trying to work with brave community-based volunteers to get food to the most needy. In an interview with journalist Samantha Power spoke of her frustration trying to get assistance to the millions of victims of the war in Sudan as ceasefires are repeatedly broken. She called on the civilian authorities there to remove bureaucratic hurdles that are slowing down aid delivery and costing lives. She also finds it heartbreaking that some people are fleeing to Chad for the 4th time in their lives because of the ethnic violence in Darfur. The war, which broke out in mid-April between rival military factions, has forced more than 2.5 million people to flee their homes. Over 250,000 have crossed into Egypt, which on June the 10th began requiring that all Sudanese obtain entry visas. Previously, only men aged 16 to 50 needed visas, meaning that many women, children and elderly crossed while the men stayed behind in the northern Sudanese town of Wadi Halfa, waiting for days or weeks to apply for visas at the Egyptian consulate. The United Nations has appealed to Sudan's neighbors to keep their borders open even as it opens a humanitarian corridor to deliver food from southern Egypt to Wadi Halfa. So let's take a closer look at how residents are affected. El Safi Madi was separated from his wife and 3 younger children on June the 1st near Sudan's border with Egypt and does not know when he'll see them again. Like many families fleeing the war in the capital Khartoum, Madi, a prominent music teacher and conductor, left home without a visa required for entry into Egypt. His older sons, aged 19 and 17, needed their passports renewed, a task that became impossible as the conflict paralyzed central government offices. Madi and the 2 elder boys turned back to Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast, while the rest of the family headed north to Cairo. More than 2.5 million people have been uprooted in this way by the conflict between Sudan's army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, including an estimated 600,000 who have crossed into neighboring states. Over 250,000 have crossed into Egypt, which on June the 10th began requiring that all Sudanese obtain entry visas. Previously, only men aged 16 to 50 needed visas, meaning that many women, children and elderly crossed while men stayed behind in the northern Sudanese town of Wadi Halfa, waiting for days or weeks to apply for their visas. VOA's correspondent Mohammed Yusuf joins me now from Nairobi. Hi, Mohammed.
Hello there.
So what's the situation on ground as we speak in Sudan?
The situation hasn't changed very much from what it's been the last more than 2 months ago, even though there have been ceasefire which ended amid this week. Fighting continues in many parts of the country, Khartoum, but there's a very concerned situation, particularly in Darfur regions. And many have raised the possibility of genocide taking place in Darfur, particularly done by militias of Arab origin and RSF, paramilitary RSF, targeting some communities in the Darfur region. That has been the particularly much worrying concerns that have been now coming up, particularly this week, and many people have been fleeing to Chad, and of course Egypt has been a destination for many Sudanese, and South Sudan has also been where many people have fled, and in parts of also at the border in Ethiopia.
We're hearing that some families are separated as a result of Egypt restricting their entry, especially for young men and people in their mid-ages. Has there been any comments or reactions from the Egyptian authorities regarding this?
There have been no specific comments regarding this issue as we speak, but as of June 10th, Egyptian authorities have said that all studies of Egypt must have this designated issue compared to previous time. For example, people who are 45, 50 are required to go for visas. But now it appears that all Sudanese will need a visa to cross to Sudan, rather to cross to Egypt. But generally, there have been also some officials have in the last 2 weeks or so issue of forgery, particularly issues of visas. And as you rightly mentioned in the report, there are Sudanese who are stuck in those borders, don't have documents, and some have those documents at home. Some documents have been destroyed. We are also talking expired documents that have been quite challenging for many Sudanese. And of course, with time, I think it looked like UNHCR will have to do something, discuss some of those issues with the Egyptian government, and so that some of these people can get help, particularly the elderly and the people who are diseases.
Mohammed, it seems like an anomaly to me and weird that in such a war, a crisis situation, people would be mandated to get visas before they could cross the border into supposedly safer areas. Is this a normal thing, or is it just for this situation?
It is for this situation, of course. As time progresses, as war continues, we're talking of age limit getting those visas. Now it's everybody. Now as war continues, of course, your passport, people ability to move is going to be more problematic. Now they are encouraged to get visas, maybe to get to a point where there will be no visas. And that is quite challenging. If this war continues, going to be more problems for the Sudanese. Even those people who would like to get out, visa will be a problem. People having problem also getting documents, particularly passports. Along the border, there are also challenges. People, Sudanese immigration, are finding it difficult to get new documents for people, but they're only renewing the expired documents. And as time progresses, of course, it's going to be more difficult for the Sudanese now to be able to get out or to travel in neighboring countries, even far beyond Sudan, even in many parts of Africa or other continents.
And in such situations, women, children, and the very young men are considered as vulnerable, minors, just to say. But a lot of those do not require visas to cross into Egypt, just the men between age 16 and 50. So without the men who would usually look out for them, how would families, which just consist of women and children, how would they, survive? How will they get things together? How will they, be optimistic when they don't have their menfolk around them? How are they being taken care of?
Yeah, for the men, of course, it's becoming quite difficult for them to get to Egypt. But for the people who are able to cross, remember, in terms of culture, religion, that helps us the Sudanese when they cross, and language when they cross to Egypt. That hasn't been a problem for the Sudanese. And we've seen people walking to sell streets. That's how
I'm afraid we've lost Mohammed's audio there. Would you apologize for that? But the VOA's correspondent, Mohammed Yusuf, was speaking to us from Nairobi on the situation in Sudan, and of course about the fleeing families, especially women and children who have been able to get into Egypt, and the restriction on men aged 16 to 50 who are required to have some sort of documentation before they can enter Egypt. Away from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, tributes have begun pouring in for the 5 men killed on board the Titan sub in what U.S. officials say was a catastrophic implosion. U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Mulger said an unmanned deep-sea robot deployed from a Canadian ship discovered the wreckage of the submersible about 1,600 feet from the bow of the century-old wreck, 4 kilometers below the surface. Mr. Mulger added that the debris found was consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Rescue team from several countries had spent days searching thousands of square miles of open seas with planes and ships for any sign of the 22-foot Titan operated by US-based Ocean Gate Expeditions.
This morning, an ROV, or remote-operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris. In consultation with experts from within the Unified Command, the debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Upon this determination, we immediately notified the families.
Meanwhile, movie director and submersible maker James Cameron says he wishes he had sounded the alarm earlier about the submersible Titan that imploded on an expedition to the Titanic wreckage, saying he had found the hull design risky. Mr. Cameron became a deep-sea explorer in the 1990s while researching and making his Oscar-winning blockbuster Titanic, and is part owner of Triton Submersibles, which make submersibles for research and tourism. Is part of the small and close-knit submersible community or manned underwater vehicle industry. When he heard, as many in the industry had shared, that Ocean Gate was making a deep-sea submersible with a composite carbon fiber and titanium hull, Cameron said he was skeptical about it.
Ocean Gate shouldn't have been doing what it was doing. I think that's pretty clear. I wish I had been more vocal about that, but I think I was unaware that they weren't certified because I wasn't really studying it. I wasn't really interested. Stockton Rush asked me if I wanted to go out there and dive this season. You know, I wasn't interested. This father and son on Father's Day, you know, paid $500,000 to go down in this thing. Holy crap. You know, it's just tragic, and it's horrific, and it's unnecessary. And by the way, it's not lost on me as somebody who's studied the meaning of Titanic. It's greater meaning to us, you know, historically and societally, that it's about warnings that were ignored. That ship's lying at the bottom of the ocean, not because of the nature of its steel or the nature of its compartments, but just because of bad seamanship. The captain was warned. There were icebergs ahead. It was a moonless night, and he plowed ahead for whatever reason. I think there was some greed. There was some glory in it. He had to boot up his rear from J. Bruce Ismay to get into New York on time or early, so they'd have a headline, which I show in the film, you know. And here we are again, and at the same place, you know. Now there's one wreck lying next to the other wreck, for the same damn reason.
South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol says South Korea and Vietnam have agreed to boost security cooperation, citing North Korea's nuclear threat, and committed to increasing bilateral trade and investment. Mr. Yoon signed 17 agreements with Vietnam's President Vo Van Thuong on a number of issues, from critical minerals to Vietnamese workers in Korea. The two nations also agreed to boost defense industry relations and security cooperation in the South China Sea. South Korea is one of the many countries discussing possible arms sales to Vietnam as it seeks to modernize its arsenal. Mr. Yoon's first visit to Vietnam as president comes at a pivotal time in their relations as bilateral trade falls and Hanoi plans tax hikes for top Korean manufacturers. Bilateral trade has fallen by a quarter in the first 5 months of this year compared to the same period in 2022, with a nearly 30% drop in Vietnamese imports of South Korean products. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the world expects the United States and China to work together as the two biggest economies at a summit in Paris on easing poor countries' debt and unlocking climate financing. The International Monetary Fund has reached its targets of making $100 billion in special drawing rights available for vulnerable countries. That's according to its managing director, Kristalina Georgieva. Rich countries agreed in 2021 to rechannel some of their unused IMF special drawing rights, an international reserve currency, to poor countries.
I think it's clear from this summit we do have consensus. We share the goal of securing a more prosperous, healthy, and livable planet. And it's also clear that there's political will and commitment to multilateralism to translate intentions into actions. Indeed, I'm pleased to share this stage with colleagues from around the world, including Premier Li Qiang. As I said in a speech earlier in the year, as the world's two largest economies, we have a responsibility to work together on global issues. It's something we can do and something the world expects of us. We have discussed during this summit creative ways in which we can bring private capital in and at scale to work cooperatively with public institutions, the MDBs, and others. I believe we have the necessary ingredients to make real progress: political leadership, creativity, innovative financing mechanisms, and the openness and courage to learn from the past, as well as to forge new solutions for the future.
I want to thank all those countries, developed countries as well as emerging market economies, who have pledged to provide part of their special drawing rights that were allocated in August 2021, so we can lend at highly concessional terms for 20 years with 10.5 years grace period. In other words, provide vital resource to low-income countries as well as to vulnerable middle-income countries.
A fire extinguisher reportedly exploded during a fire drill exercise at a school in Bangkok, Thailand, killing one Thai student and injuring 5 others. Police officials arrived at the scene at Rajavinit Mathayon School shortly after the incident, but no further details have been released. According to local media reports, a male student died from the explosion, while 5 others suffered minor injuries, 2 of which have been sent to hospital for medical care. Authorities say the students were in the middle of a fire drill exercise. However, further investigation into how the incident occurred is underway. And finally on the program, revelers at the Glastonbury Music Festival in Somerset in the UK explored a new art installation made with old cars to recreate Stonehenge. Multicolored vintage vehicles were piled on top of each other to look like the famous stone circle in southern England. According to a report, the installation is the work of artist Jo Rush, who is said to have first built the so-called Carhenge more than 30 years ago. There were also fireworks for music fans to enjoy the opening ceremony. The famed music festival will feature artists such as Elton John, Guns N' Roses, and the Arctic Monkeys this weekend. Glastonbury, founded by Michael Eavis 53 years ago, typically sells out before, and headliners have been announced given the strength of previous lineups. Tickets for the 2023 edition sold out in 1 hour when they went on sale in November. For the resale tickets 5 months later, it took just 6 minutes. That's the program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers. Bye for now.